did this impetus for reform come from? Who organized this? Who were these reformers? The stereotype is, of course, the Eastern middle-class woman, but in reality, working-class folks, African Americans, Westerners, and even political machine party bosses themselves all advocated different types of reform. The Union Labor Party gets California to pass child labor laws that are actually effective, as well as workman compensation laws, the idea where the people you work for have to pay you if you get hurt on the job. They also pass laws to limit the hours women can work, and other states began to follow. But that was done by a union, of course. Tammany Hall, the corrupt political machine of New York City, the poster boy for corruption, Tammany Hall's Charles Francis Murphy begins trying to gain popular support by passing laws improving working conditions in the city of New York. He did this because it was popular with the people, and that's how they were going to continue winning elections with the advent of the secret ballot. But if there was one event, if there's one defining moment in the progressive movement, it's the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. Now, this is a factory where they make shirts. It's in downtown New York City, and it catches fire. Now, it's all women who work there, and when it catches fire, they find out that the owners have painted the windows shut because they didn't want the girls opening them up. The doors to leave the building were locked because they didn't want the girls going outside and taking breaks. And so the girls had to either go to the roof of the building or bust out the windows and either leap to their death or simply burn up in the building. And we have this amazing episode here in 1911 where New Yorkers walking down the street will sit there and watch this building burn to the ground and watch women just throw themselves out of the building one after the other. 146 girls are killed in this episode. In one of the most shocking incidents in American history. This is the picture that greeted you when you got up the next day to pick up the morning paper, as you see these policemen just stand there helpless as these poor girls just throw themselves off the building to escape the fire. And if this is shocking and tragic to you, and that's why I put this picture in here, imagine what it was like in 1911 when people saw this, and they began to question this system that we had of capitalism without rules. And it led to a massive push for reform, particularly of working conditions. There you see the girls being boxed up to be buried, and here you see a political cartoon with this man in a suit covered in money holding the door shut, to increase his profits a little bit. He didn't want the girls going outside. Today we hear stories like this from China, and we're all appalled. But as I've made the point many times, we were the China of 100 years ago. The response to this is a 3-year commission called the Wagner Commission to explore the fire, and it broadens to expose dangerous working conditions in a number of industries. It issues a classic progressive manifesto demanding better and safer working conditions. It relies heavily on statistics and experts. That's the whole progressive thing, right? We're going to ask the experts, the technocrats, what to do. It was led by Tammany Hall, remember that's the corrupt political machine, Tammany Hall Democrats, Robert Wagner, and Al Smith. We'll talk a lot more about Al Smith later. And New York becomes a leader in the country in passing effective workplace regulation as a response to the terrible events of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. Hiram Johnson of California, George Norris of Nebraska, and William Borah of Idaho all served in the Senate from the West, and they were all progressives. The federal government was far more important in the West than it was in the East. If you look up there, I've given you 2 maps here showing you the percentage of land owned by the federal government in each state. And what you can see is that the West is owned heavily by the federal government. And so consequently, what the federal government did had a much bigger impact in, say, Nevada than it did in, say, New York State. And so because government was so important in the West, these guys got really involved in these reforms. Issues like water rights, regulating the railroad, what to do about public land, all became major political issues out West. A lot of federally funded projects were started in the West. These are projects paid for with federal tax dollars. Things like massive dams, the Grand Coulee Dam, for example, highways, and national parks, which are really going to take off under Teddy Roosevelt. We'll talk about in a little bit. But understand that the progressive movement, we often think about it as something that happened in the cities, but it was probably more important out West. Let's talk about black folks. White progressives did not really care about race relations. The government had never shown any real sign of support for African Americans for their rights after freeing them, of course, with the 13th Amendment, giving them the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. They kind of left them to their own devices. In fact, those 2 amendments themselves were not really enforced by the Supreme Court. And black people were only nominally free, and in many, many places in this country continue to not have the right to vote. Most African Americans had embraced the philosophy of Booker T. Washington: be a good boy, behave, work hard, get an education, and one day whites will accept you as equals. But a new generation of black intellectuals challenged this idea. They were led by W.E.B. Du Bois, here on the left. He wrote a book called The Souls of Black Folks in 1903, and he attacked Booker T. Washington. He said that Booker T. Washington was arguing for continued segregation, that the white people were never just going to say, hey, black folks, you sure have worked hard, now you can be equals with us. He said this limits the aspirations and dreams of black folks. And he said that talented blacks need to go to the university and they need to not focus on agricultural and mechanical training. They needed to become lawyers and doctors and get into the type of professions that have actual influence in society. He wanted them to be professionals, not simply laborers. He said, Du Bois argues that civil rights have to be demanded, not waited on as a reward for continued servitude. In 1905, the Niagara movement launched in Canada. They had to go to Canada because no American hotel would let them stay there because they were black, of course. The Niagara movement would evolve by 1909 into the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Persons. It had both black and white members, and they began by launching a campaign against lynching. And they joined Southern muckrakers like Ida B. Wells, who had been fighting this fight for some time by now. And this is the birth of the NAACP, who, as you can imagine, is going to come up again later in our course.